Hey guys, welcome back to the other side. Today we are going to be talking about identity. Who am I is the age old question. And honestly, being American, Mexican, Mexican American, pocha, coconut, I've heard it all. I'm like the whitest Mexican people have ever met, I've been told. So today I needed help. And I met Andrea Vargas at a wellness event, and she was wonderful enough to join us. She is a licensed family, marriage, and individual counselor, and she is here to help shrink me and anybody else who is having the same questions out there today. You know, welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was really excited. I had told you I believe in full transparency, and I had reached out to someone else that I
Mhm.
had met. And but originally when I saw your Instagram, it resonated with me because even though I do I'm confused, right? I'm
Yep.
confused now because it's kind of I know I'm Mexican and I love mariachis and I love being Mexican, but the word Chicana like just kind of gets under my skin. I don't like it and I know what it means and I know what it represents, which is absolutely positive, right? But for me it's just still a word like I don't want to be called that. And so I'm like and now it's time that we have this conversation and I reached out to another therapist and she didn't respond, which was great because then we were able to talk.
Yes.
And I know you share the same passion. And like I said, when I first saw your Instagram, it really caught my attention because I had just come back from Mexico and we were talking about vapor rub,
Oh,
vaparu.
yes.
And yours is vaparu. And then you have that cute little saying, sana sana.
Colita de trauma.
Sana sana colita de trama, and I just loved it. I thought it was super cute, and we all need to, sana sana colita our trama, right? So what is it that, you can help me with when it comes to identity?
Well, it depends, right? Because identity is so individual to each person. So I think if for you exploring your identity on the realm of the term Chicana, I
Mhm.
think that you know it it's really exploring why it is so triggering for you. Why does it bother you so much?
I well, everything goes back to childhood,
Mhm.
right? And when I was younger, the word Chicana was more, zoot suiters, like the chola, and I never resonated with that's kind I wanted to be a chola for a hot minute.
Your parents didn't let you, I'm
I mean,
guessing.
they didn't let me, yeah, but, I wanted to have a nickname like Smiley or Flaca or something cool, like, I thought it was cool. Of course, I was veered the other way, but, yeah, now that I'm older, when I really do think about it, it takes me back to that, like, the not so positive aspects of the people in my culture, when I would be like, "They make me look bad." Literally, that's my thought process, like, "They make me look bad," because unfortunately, we live in a society where people
Mhm.
are viewed as a whole.
Correct. Well, not only that, but I think that for many immigrant parents, I'm first generation, and so I think for me as first generation, my parents were very much about me and my siblings not falling into becoming cholos or cholas, right? And
Right.
so everything was directly correlated that they thought was correlated to it. It was like, no, you can't do that, or you can't wear that, and so it was very much the like we will not have our children be cholos
Mhm.
because there was a lot of negative connotation and but also where do I mean and that's a completely different issue of like gangs and stuff, but I think especially in our communities we also know that oftentimes it happens when our parents have to work a lot,
Right.
and so I think building community, and yeah, maybe they're doing the best, but I think that um being able to find your own identity and as a kid when you hear all of these negative comments about whether it's the word or cholos or chicanos, I think you internalize it as something bad, and
Mhm.
so we don't want to be we don't want to be identified as bad, right?
Right.
Or what we perceive as bad or what our parents perceive as bad. And so we try to steer away from it. And I think for a lot of us, then we try to really acculturate and assimilate with more of, like the Caucasian culture.
Mhm. What we believe is good.
Correct. What we've been told is good, at least.
Yeah, and I guess then what makes it the Caucasian culture? Because in that sense, that's like saying there's no good Mexicans.
Well, yes and no, right? Because we know that everybody loves Mexican food. So
Yeah.
our food is good, at
Well,
least.
Taco Bell got number 1 Mexican restaurant. I
That's because
saw
people
that on
don't
your
vote.
You guys need to vote more.
That's horrible.
But again, so what is good, and I think for a lot of our parents, is working hard, right?
Mhm.
And I think that a lot of our parents work hard, and each generation, does better with the resources that are provided for them.
Right.
And so how do we? What generation Mexican are you?
I'm 4th.
Fourth generation.
Mhm.
And again, I think that a lot of times, even though we are second, third, fourth generation, there's a lot of the culture that we hold on to.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, one of the things that we don't hold on to is the language. And there's a reason for that, right? Like teaching your kids Spanish. Like if you live in a country where Spanish is the language that they speak, you're not teaching your kids Spanish.
Right.
And so a lot of times when our parents do come here, like we speak the language that is spoken here, which is English.
Yes.
And so a lot of times we get a lot of shame for not speaking Spanish. But again, we live in a country where English is the primary language.
And that's what I've been facing more of today, and which brings it more up for me
Mhm.
because I do feel more judged from my own people, and you actually brought that to my attention the last time we spoke, is like, but they didn't have to teach you Spanish,
No,
your language was English,
yeah.
and which like, and it's so crazy because just hearing something like that, like, validates my feelings
Mhm.
and makes me feel like, okay, maybe it's not just me. Because I do feel a lot of pressure to accept. I hate to say it too because it is my culture, like, but I have to tell you this, and when I asked my grandma to teach me how to make tamales, she was like, "Ay, mija, buy them. It's cheaper and easier." Like, she was not gonna I literally taught myself how to make tamales with my Nicaraguan friends. She kinda taught me, but I didn't nobody in my family knew or was even gonna teach me,
Yeah. And
so
there's memes about it, right? Like enjoy the tamales because there's an entire generation of tias that don't know how to make them.
yeah, and when I get invited to a tamale making party, I'm so excited, but honestly, I made the best tamales myself, like, I did. I was like, "You know what? If I'm gonna make them, I'm putting I have chicharron, shrimp, chicken mole,"
Yeah.
like, I got
You
down.
get to personalize it to your liking.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. But, yeah, that's kind of, how I grew up, like
And there's no right or wrong way to, really identify, right? Because your identity is yours. And kind of like we discussed earlier, my experience as a female is going to be very different than your experience as a female. And we're both Mexican or Latina women. Um, but at the end of the day, everybody's experience is very different and individual to the lens of their own life, right? And their own experiences. And personality has a lot to do with it, even within a family. You have how many siblings do you have?
I come from 5. Yeah, I'm
So you
one of
have five siblings.
mhm.
If we sit all five of you down and we ask you to tell us about your experiences in childhood, you're all
Oh,
going to give us a different version
completely
because you
different.
have all experienced your childhood differently, and each one of you has gotten a different version of your parents,
Yeah.
right? Because we go through different phases depending on what phase in our life we're in,
Mhm.
our age, our experiences. Like, I'm pretty sure that your mom wasn't the same mom to your oldest sibling as she was to your youngest sibling because
No.
she was a completely different person and she probably had a lot more experience
Mhm.
being a parent, right? So the anxiety wasn't as high.
Unfortunately for my younger siblings, my mom had a lot more trauma, so
Mm,
they kind of really got the short end of the stick.
yeah. And sometimes it's the other way around. So
Mhm.
again, identity is very individual because it really does have to do with your own experiences.
Right.
And like we said, we identify very differently, right? Even as women, because our experiences as women, although we have some similarities, are also very unique to us.
Yes, yes. I love that, and that's why I wanted to have you on today because people need to understand that too. They need to understand that just because we're different also or we look the same doesn't mean we're the same. Like you said, every experience is different, even the same family experience is
Yeah, and
different.
and even in doing the work that I do,
Mhm,
I've come to realize I've been doing this for a little over a decade now, and I've realized that at the end of the day, we have a lot more in common than we don't.
mhm,
And we have a lot more in common because we all know suffering, we all know pain, we all know what we perceive to be the bad emotions, right? And there are no bad emotions, there are just emotions.
mhm,
But we consider the bad emotions the difficult
right.
emotions. And because we come from a culture that doesn't speak about emotions, a lot we internalize it, and so we continue the cycle. And so it's not until we decide that we no longer want to live in pain, we
Mhm.
no longer want to hurt daily, right? Because they a lot of times they tell like, you know, what is the saying in Spanish? It escapes me right now, but it'll come to me.
Mhm.
But, we don't allow ourselves to be depressed. We don't
Right.
allow ourselves to be sad, Échale ganas.
Mm.
Like, just keep going. Échale
Oh,
ganas.
yeah, yeah.
And
Pick
and
up your bootstraps and go,
yeah.
basically, yeah.
And so a lot of times we can't. We generally can't, and we neglect our emotions a lot
Yeah.
culturally. And not just, Latinos, but I think across the board, like emotions is not something that we really deal with. And I think we're really starting to see a shift with younger generations, which
Mhm.
is good. But I think that definitely starting your own healing journey, I think, is very helpful.
And I'm sure you would agree that doing things like this, right? Having healthy conversations,
Yeah.
bringing up your emotions, your thoughts with somebody who can help you walk through that is a huge start and
Yeah.
totally necessary in the healing
The
process.
most healing and the most, growth happens having the difficult
Mhm.
conversations, and we don't have the difficult conversations, right? We don't talk about intergenerational trauma. We don't talk about incest culturally. We don't talk about physical abuse and verbal abuse and emotional abuse, and those are the things that continue to perpetuate within our culture that don't really allow us to grow and move forward.
Can you give an example of something like that that has been so acceptable for so long that you come across maybe often that seems normal when you know dang well that it's not and people need to be aware of?
Oof. I have an entire
Do
list.
you? Well,
I
hey,
just
start with just
it
like
just
top
depends what.
2. Let's talk about single women, right? Like maybe abuse or things that they may be accepting that are really unacceptable and they're deal breakers, not a maybe or because I know as women we tend to justify a lot of things. And I know as Latin women culturally, even though I'm fourth generation, like there are things that we accept as women and think that to be good women, right? It just and you what you come across more often in battered and abused women. Let's go there. Like that.
I think a lot of that really I think what really continues to allow that to happen culturally is, and I don't know if you've heard of them, and I don't know them off the top of my head, all 10 of them, but the 10 commandments of Marianismo.
Mm,
So it essentially gives you a list of 10 things that of the role of what the of women in our culture, right?
okay.
And so a lot of them are like, just off the top of my head, the ones that I remember is like we don't talk about issues outside of the home.
Mhm.
So we learned very early on that we don't talk about our problems outside of the home. So everybody always has this idea that you have the perfect little family,
Yeah.
and but you being in those four walls realize like,
Mhm.
hell no.
Yeah, I used to tell my son that all the time. If you meet somebody and they act like their family life is perfect, they're lying or they don't know.
Yeah.
I'm like, because nobody's family is
Yeah.
perfect.
And and I had a lot of friends growing up where I thought they had the perfect family, and then I realized, oh, they don't. They're just as screwed up as mine. And a lot of us come up from screwed up families, right?
Yeah,
Because again, we don't have the difficult
right.
conversations. Another one is sex is for procreating, not pleasure. Um, Like, you will not go against what your husband says,
Mm.
and you would just follow as he says. Um, I think that's all I can remember right now, but look them up.
Yeah, but even those 3, what's the name of that again?
The 10 Commandments of Marianismo.
Maria
Marianismo.
Marianismo. What does
Mhm.
that mean?
Marianismo is, I wanna say it's from when colonizing came to our
Mhm.
countries, and the way that, they kind of infiltrated into our culture and how they put in different things. Oh,
Oh,
here we
look
have
at
them.
that.
So it's, don't forget the place of the woman, don't give up your traditions. And we know that a lot of our moms will not lose their traditions, which is
Right.
why it's difficult for them oftentimes to leave a marriage, right? Because we don't get a divorce,
Mhm,
right? Like, you're
mhm,
in it for the long run,
mhm.
regardless of what they do
Yeah,
to you.
yeah. Till death
Um,
do us part,
yeah.
literally. Yeah.
Don't be an old maid, independent, or have your own opinions. Don't put your needs first. Don't wish anything but to be a housewife. I have failed at all of these.
Wow.
Don't forget, sex is to make babies, not pleasure. Don't be unhappy with your man no matter what he does to you.
Jeez.
Don't ask for help. Don't discuss your personal problems outside of the house, and don't change.
Yeah. So sad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is, and for a lot of us, we grew up with this, right? Like,
Yeah.
I could say that my mom probably fits every single category.
Mhm.
The only thing is that my mom did end up divorcing my dad. Like, when she was done, she was done. But again, I think because of her cultures and her traditions, she's never remarried. She's never dated. She's just on her own.
Mm.
And maybe it's
Like a
been her own
death.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, so now that I'm single, I don't know if that's always like poor them. It's a lot by
Yeah, maybe
choice.
it's a choice,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
her experience was so bad that she's like, I'd rather be with
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And a lot of women, rather be on their own because of their own experience with men.
Yes. Yes. And culturally, they do
Yep.
have this idea of what men are, and Latin men are very culturally a certain way,
Yes.
and I hate to put them in a bunch because men are, and I hate to put anybody in a bunch, but
Like, in generally speaking, right?
yeah,
Because we
they're
can't say that they
taught.
all fall under the same
But
category.
yeah, but they are kind of, it's acceptable in the culture. It's
Mhm.
expected in the culture. Even I think the growing up as a young man, it's like, "Oh, you got a lot of girlfriends. Cool, dude," but oh, don't be a little slut over there. It's very
Well, it's very, what is the word? One-sided, but there's another term that I'm looking for,
hypocritical.
that too. Um, where it's okay for one to do but not the other. Well, either
Mm.
way, I think when it comes to, like, males and females, especially culturally, the way that we raised our females is very different than the way that we raised our
Mhm.
men, right?
Mhm.
And so oftentimes we are very strict with our girls.
Mhm.
Like, I remember, even as for me, first generation, like, I was raised with, like, no vayas a salir con tu domingo siete, which means don't get pregnant. No
Mhm.
vayas a salir panzona, which means don't get pregnant. No vayas a, andar de piruja, like, don't get
Oh,
pregnant or sleep
jeez.
around, right? Like, so everything was around not getting pregnant as a teenager. And then you hit a certain age, like when I was in my early 20s to late 20s, like, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids?
Yes, you're gonna be an old maid, and yeah,
Yeah. And
and
again, it goes to Marianismo, right? Don't be independent, be an old maid, or, have kids. And
yeah,
so
very confusing.
yeah, it sends a very confusing message, because at least for me as a female, it's like, there's all of this anxiety put around sex and not having sex, and they never talk to you about sex or what it
Mhm.
is, right?
Right.
And it's very taboo. So you see
Yes.
sex as something bad.
Yes.
And then when you become an adult and they're asking you, you're going to have kids or if you're going to get married, it's like, so now, like,
Now
even in
it's
your own
okay.
sexuality, it's difficult for you to explore sexuality, because a lot of women don't get the opportunity to enjoy sex because they feel like they're doing something bad because they have been shamed for it for such a long
Yeah.
time.
And now it's a job just to
Yeah,
procreate.
exactly.
Or they wanna have sex,
Yeah,
so they get married because they wanna have sex, and they feel it's the
yeah.
only way they
And
can, and they
then,
end up single
exactly.
mothers or yeah,
Or in
in a
terrible
bad marriage.
marriages,
Mhm.
or because we teach men that, sex is for their pleasure, they never get to please their women. And so, like, I've met women in their 40s that have never had an orgasm.
Wow.
And that's sad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think we also don't teach our men female anatomy because we make it so much about them and their own pleasure that we don't teach them about female anatomy. And female anatomy is a lot more complex than theirs, right? Like,
Yeah,
theirs is
for
very
sure.
external, like they
Yes.
can't miss it.
Yeah.
Where for us, it's very different. And for women, we have different ways of orgasming, right? Like, we have internal and external orgasms.
Mhm.
And then we have the clitoris that everybody always jokes around and says, like, women can never find it. And then we have like the G-spot, which is internal. So again, there's a lot of women that don't know that either, right? So again, we never allow women to really explore their sexuality because we very much are okay with male masturbation, but we never encourage women or girls to masturbate,
Right.
and explore their own bodies. So then there's that kind of, then you get married and you're expected to know what to do, but you don't know your own body.
Yeah.
And men
Yeah.
don't know your body.
Right.
So then
And men
a lot
have
of
seen
times,
who knows how much porn they've seen, and they think that's it.
exactly. They
And
feel
if,
like that's
unfortunately,
connection.
if women have seen it and they're confused,
Yeah.
they don't know, and you just have this crazy. Yeah, that's horrible. So, but where would you say the balance is? Because that's always my thing, right? Where's the balance? Like, I get all of that, but there has to be a balance. There, at what age? I mean,
I think
that's healthy. That could be healthy.
mhm. I think the balance in all of it, right, is education. I think it's really having information, right?
But by
And
our public schools, like, I don't, that's my thing.
well,
Like, where should, if you were you are a parent, but your
mhm,
daughter's how old now?
4.
Yeah, so you're the mother. Do you want the public school teaching her? How would you go about, I'm sure you would teach her yourself, right?
I think for me it would be
And at what age would you?
well, I think even for parents, right? It's like you always meet your kid where they're at. So even when they come to you with the sex question or like where do babies come from,
Mhm.
right? So where do you think if they're 4 or 5, where do you think they come from? And then depending on their answer is meeting them where they're at. You're also not going to pull out a book and like show them,
Yeah.
like exactly what, how to
Right,
do
right,
it.
right.
But so it's always meeting your child where they're at.
Yeah. Okay. And I love that.
Hmm.
Because we do all mature at different ages,
Yeah.
and the groups we're around are different, and you don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, and you also like once you send them out into the world, you don't know what kind of information they're going to be hearing out there, right? So a lot of times they do come home with questions, with
Yeah.
things that you're like, "Where did you hear that?"
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's finding a balance that's going to work for you, right? Because it's different for every parent.
Right.
Not every parent wants to let their kids know. Not every parent wants to, have those conversations with their kids yet. But it's important for us to have those conversations.
So what advice would you give a parent who wasn't ready to have that conversation? But you know that they should, right? If the kid's
Mhm.
asking, the kid needs to know. I believe, like you
I
said, you're not going
think
to pull out a book, but
it's meeting your child where they're at.
mhm.
And perhaps also letting them know, like, you're a little too young for this right now, but when you get old enough and I feel that it's appropriate for you to know this, we'll have a much further conversation about it in more detail.
Yeah. I like to say that, well, not that I like to say, but for a minute I was thinking we kind of got off identity, but it all just ties in
Yeah.
together because these little conversations and these moments are what mold our identity.
Yeah. They're all identity, right? Sexuality is identity, gender is identity, sex is identity.
Yes.
All of it is identity. And so again, it's a difficult question because there's so many layers to it.
Right. So for a parent, if they weren't able to have those conversations, then definitely seek a therapist, right? Who specializes in that type of, you know, whatever their
Well,
identity issue may be at the time, or
I think there's definitely therapy. There's a lot of times your pediatrician can help you and guide you in those things. So it's really finding the resources as to what's going to work better for yourself.
right,
It's
for the
better than the
family.
internet, right? Because
Well,
the internet has a lot of
and that's why
misinformation.
I keep asking,
Yeah.
because that's where we go.
And that's where a
We
lot
go
of kids
straight
go.
to
And
God Google,
yeah,
know?
and that's where a lot of kids go because
Yes.
it's at their fingertips. A
Right.
lot of kids now have cell phones, they have iPads, they have computers, they have access to the internet. So again, do you have your child to have accurate information
Right.
or inaccurate information?
Well, and again, that's why I dig, because even the parent will go to Google. So,
But at least as an adult, you can
eh,
more or less, with
yeah,
life experience,
determine.
know what's going to work for you and what isn't, and what's
Yeah. So what
factual
do
and what
they need it?
isn't.
Obviously, I always say check anybody out on the Better Business Bureau,
Hmm.
right? A license number,
Hmm.
yes. And if it is an identity question, what type of therapy would you think they would seek out?
Well, I think with a clinician, right? Because I think that, and it's finding the right therapist for you, because it's like when you go see a doctor, right? Like,
Mhm.
you may go to this doctor because they're Latina and female, right?
Mhm.
So you want to make sure that you're able to connect with them, but that doesn't mean she's going to be the right fit for you.
Yeah.
So it's really exploring a clinician that is going to be the right fit for you, because not every clinician is the right fit for everybody just because we're in the same field, right? And
Yes.
I always let my clients know, if at any point in our therapy you feel like we are not a good fit, let me know and I will give you 3 referrals. And
Awesome.
so it's always making sure, and a lot of times people have a bad experience with therapy, and
Mhm.
so then they don't return because they have that negative experience. And it's like, well, I encourage you to continue to look for a clinician that is going to be the right fit for you.
Right, because there is one, and I actually dealt with that myself.
Mhm.
So I do say the same. I'm like, date them like I dated
Mhm.
churches,
Yeah.
date your clinician, date the churches,
Ask them
ask
questions.
them questions and see if they're a fit, and don't quit until you find the right one. I had one that was falling asleep on me. And I was so mad because I was so weak, and I hope nobody's ever as weak as I was at that moment. Because you usually go see somebody when you're at your weakest moment, and the bitch kept falling asleep, and I wasn't strong enough to be like, "What the hell are you doing?" And then I was so lost, right? My ex finally just like, "I'll go."
Mhm.
And then he's like, later throwing it in my face, "You took me to that stupid lady. She just kept falling asleep." Like, "Oh
So,
god."
at least for me, I've been in sessions where my eyes get really heavy. And I usually don't, like, I'm usually alert and I'm in the room and I'm present. But I think for me, what I have noticed, at least for me,
Yeah.
is that happens to me when my client's energy is really heavy.
Okay.
When they themselves are really down and they're just like in a really negative space, like, it drains my energy.
Yes,
And
I could
that's when
see
I
that.
start to get tired, because and sometimes it happens with clients where, like, it's never happened before. And then they come in the room that day and I immediately just feel this heaviness,
Ugh.
and I immediately just start to feel tired. I'm like, 5 minutes ago I was fine. Like, what's
Yeah.
going on? And I realized that the energy that the client brings in the room definitely affects us as clinicians.
Yes, yes. I
Yeah.
I could not, well, I can't say I could not because I do a lot of it. I'm not a clinician, but you have people who call you, and they want advice, or they need help, and but yes, I it's very draining. It's
Yeah.
emotionally draining. How do you recharge yourself?
I have a lot of things that I do. I meditate. I try to work out. I should be better at it, because it really helps, release the energy that, I pick up in the room.
Mm.
Um, what else do I do? I journal. I think for me, journaling really helps. And as a clinician, I've done my own therapeutic work, right? And I think it's really important for clinicians to do their own therapeutic work, because you're a much better clinician for it, right? You're
Yes.
much better able to relate to people, because, again, I said, like, we have a lot more in common than not.
Mhm.
And I think because I've done my own work, and I continue to do my work because this is lifelong work, right?
Yes.
And so I saw a therapist for 5 years and she retired, so I stopped. But now I have the tools to continue to work with myself,
Right.
right? And to regulate myself and to allow myself to feel and allow myself to release and not hold on to it and not internalize, which I
Yeah.
did for the majority of my life. I internalized everything.
Mm.
And so we think that that's what makes us, like, better, like, échale ganas, just
Yeah.
keep going.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It's
Right.
draining. And so I think also finding one that is going to work for you and finding things that are going tools that are going to work for you because not every tool works for everybody the same.
Yes.
And I always tell my clients, it's a hit and miss. We'll
Mhm.
try this, and if this doesn't work, then we'll come back to the drawing board and then we'll explore something else.
Yeah, good.
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you, we touched on family, the pressures of family when we're growing and we're learning and we're educating ourselves and we're trying to, better our family,
Hmm.
our community, and our community starts with our family, and a lot of times we get most of the slack from our family.
Hmm.
So, your professional opinion and advice, how would you help somebody navigate that? And I know, it's like asking you when you're trying to navigate it yourself, but as a professional, how is the best way to start navigating those conversations as far as boundaries on support? Let's put it that way.
Boundaries on support from your family?
Yeah, or if we should even have the conversation or ever expect it, or if the easiest thing is to never expect it and to just continue to do what we do.
That's a difficult one because it varies from person to person and their family and how open their family is, right?
Mm.
Because I see a lot of my clients are made up of first generation
Mhm.
clients, and so there's a lot of similar themes, right? Like, how do we set boundaries with our parents? How do we set boundaries with their family? Because when you start to do this work, it
Mhm.
starts to become very isolating because you and it's part of the family system, right? Like everybody plays a role in the family system. And so when you decide I refuse to play this role in my family, then you shift the dynamic of the family and you throw everybody off.
Yeah.
And I always make the analogy of like you're all doing the same dance, right? To the same song. And then you come in, but you come in with a different song and a different dance and it throws everybody off.
Mm.
And it's what happens.
Yes.
And so it is very difficult for a lot of families to see when somebody is changing the role that they play in the family because it does throw them off and there is a lot of pushback and there
Mhm.
is a lot of criticism and this work can get very isolating because your family no longer identifies, right? Because your family is used to seeing you from their lens and the role that you've played in your family.
Yeah, the
And
identity
yeah,
they've given you.
yeah. And so now you're shifting that and you're saying, I no longer want to do this. And you do become the bad guy. You become the villain,
Mhm.
right? Like, oh, se cree mucho. Like, she thinks she's better than us. Like, oh, she thinks she's, I don't know, like all kinds of
Yeah.
criticisms, right? So you become the villain and it does become very isolating. So it's also being able to know that it's not easy work, but it's worth it if you are done playing that role in your family.
Yeah.
And what I always one of the questions that I always pose that, I had to ask myself the same question and I had to sit with it is like, what role do I play in my own suffering?
Mm. Yes.
And that's a loaded question because you
Yes.
really have to sit with yourself.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, because we don't deal with emotions,
Mhm.
like depression and sadness really do become our baseline.
Yeah.
And anytime we feel joy, we get scared and like, oh, I can't feel joy. So
Yes.
we'll experience joy for small spurts, but then we revert back to that
Yeah.
sadness. And so again, what role do I play in my own suffering?
Mhm.
And how do I change it so that I no longer
Right.
suffer?
Yeah, it's proven,
Mhm.
neuroscience has proven it, that our body gives off a certain chemical.
Mhm.
So when we feel sad, it gives off a chemical. When we feel happy, it gives off a chemical. And we become addicted to these chemicals.
Yeah.
So if we're always sad and we decide we are happy one day, our body's going to be like, nope, we want this drug
Yeah.
back because this is where we're comfortable. This is what we're used to.
Yeah, that becomes our
And
baseline.
yeah, and just like a drug addict, literally our own internal drug addict
Mhm.
to these different emotions.
But, just like these chemicals that our brain makes us feel, whether it's good or bad chemicals or not good or bad, but like whether it's sadness or
Mhm.
happiness, at the end of the day, we also have a choice, right? And
Yes.
we also can choose to no longer have that be our baseline.
Mhm.
And I feel like I was in that for a really long time and it was comforting almost,
Mhm.
right? And so it's not until I decided to step outside of it, and it's not easy, and,
And that's
you
why
go
it's
through. Yeah.
comfortable because it's normal.
Nothing grows in our comfort zone.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so, it's difficult work, but I always say it's definitely worth it.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because then it's able like, then we're able to heal, right? And
Yeah.
have conversations like this and be able to have healthy conversations in order to help others maybe find that same peace within themselves or the same strength to at least start searching
Yeah,
and
definitely.
be comfortable searching. So, any last words for the audience on maybe like first steps or just where to find that courage to maybe make a change?
Well, if you're really ready to do the work, I say find a therapist that is gonna work for you. I always encourage people to find a clinician that has similar, like, cultural background as you. Like, they
Mhm.
don't have to be like, for me, it doesn't have to be a Mexican clinician, right? But I think, if you're part of the BIPOC community, then definitely look for a clinician that is within the BIPOC community as well, because there's a better understanding, right? Like I said, I don't understand. I'm not gonna know exactly your experience as a
Mhm.
Latina, female, but I at least know the culture and know the
Right.
intricacies of our culture and how difficult and complex our culture is.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna better understand that part and help explore it than somebody that has zero knowledge,
Right. That makes
right?
perfect sense.
And so, I think for me, a book that's really helped my practice is Decolonizing Therapy. I think that, I have also been able to change my approach,
Mhm.
and see it more like as ancestral medicine, and kind of like how our people, have also been led to where we're at emotionally and
Yes.
not being able to deal with our emotions. So, it's how do we dismantle what we have known for so long?
Right. And it
Yeah,
is such a complex
it
conversation. I
is.
mean, that like you said, there's layers and layers that we could unpack, which I would love to do more with you because,
Yeah.
like I said, I know my culture. I mean, my room used to be tangerine orange and canary
Mhm.
yellow was my bathroom, and that made me feel good. And you can't get any more Latin than that,
Yeah.
mariachis and the food and so it's like it's embedded in me.
It's
I
in our
mean,
DNA.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
in my DNA. I go to Mexico, the Dominican, anywhere they're speaking the language, it feels like home.
Mhm.
And so yes, I would like to understand it more and maybe dig into this more,
Yeah.
So you can count on having Andrea back. Thank you guys for being here. And we loved it. Thank you, Andrea,
Oh, thank
for
you for having
joining
me.
us today. And I look forward to future conversations.
Yes.
All
Me too.
right. Bye, guys.